everyone, so this is going to be an impromptu video, and for once this is not about the subject of prostitution, but today we're going to talk about religiously motivated veiling, and the veiling of women specifically, and the veiling of women in Muslim or Islamic societies. This topic is possibly even more controversial than discussing the sex trade, because few people would argue that a pimp or a John is an oppressed person. Well, some, they try to do that as well, but let's say not the general public. While in this debate, we have to contend with the fact that racism against Muslim communities is very real. So the situation that a lot of Muslim women or Muslim origin women that find themselves in is one and the same woman can be a victim of racist discrimination, even attacks, etc., and also be subjected to misogyny by her own community in ways that are specifically justified by the religion. And veiling, that can be the hijab or the chador or the burqa. All of these are a specific form of religiously motivated or justified misogyny. As you can probably tell from what I've been saying so far, I don't share the view that the veil is simply a personal decision or even potentially emancipatory. My understanding from years of listening to women who come from communities that normalize veiling is that, well, first of all, there are still countries where it's violently, and in communities, not just in the Middle East, but this can happen in migrant communities too, where veiling is violently enforced, and taking it off can land you in jail or can land you in actual physical danger from your own community. As so many ethnic minority women do, they find themselves in this difficult position where a lot of the only people willing to listen to them are from the right, who do often have a racist motivation, and people on the left prioritize fighting what they term Islamophobia over listening to the minority within the minority, which is the woman or the gay person in a Muslim community or country. And I'm not an expert on this issue, so I'm not going to give like this grand talk. I'm going to point you to the actual experts and the women speaking on this from personal experience. I'm going to link all of this down below and at the end of the video, etc. But I'm going to give you a brief overview why I support the campaign that is currently coming from ex-Muslimas or liberal Muslimas, because there are especially women and some men trying to reform Islam or trying to modernize Islam and say, well, we believe in Allah and we want to continue some of the practices, and we have this spiritual tradition, this religious tradition, but we don't like the misogyny, we don't like the homophobia, we don't like the extreme restriction on sexuality, etc. And well, anyway, the campaign that is coming from this community against religious veiling is that on February 2nd, they have created NoHijabDay in response to 1st of February, which is World Hijab Day, where some people say it's an anti-racist campaign, and others would say, well, it normalizes the veil, but what does the veil actually mean? The people who run the No Hijab Day campaign, also called all year round, is called Free from Hijab. Well, first of all, if you're interested in participating in this campaign, you can do like I did and take a picture of yourself either with a sign or write somewhere on your body, Free from Hijab, showing your support for this campaign. Even if you yourself are not from a Muslim background, this is about all women, and I'll tell you exactly why. In my feminist analysis, and again, this is shared by a lot of women who come from these communities and their allies, the origin of the veil is to differentiate the free woman from the enslaved woman. And of course, the veiled woman is not really free either, but she is above the slave. So in the times of the Prophet Muhammad, basically the veiling of women became more normalized to give this social cue as to who was a slave and who was a normal woman, decent woman, free woman. And this is still the basic cue or signifier that it has today. A woman who is not veiled, or who is improperly veiled, who has some hair showing, or whatever the standard might be, or some would say who has her face showing, because we know sometimes veiling also invisibilizes your literal face from the public. A woman who doesn't comply with that is, well, a whore. This is what a lot of ex-Muslimas or liberal Muslimas had to hear from their own families or communities when they didn't want to didn't want to veil or not veil in the way that their community wanted. The suggestion is that, I believe the term is fitna, that an unveiled woman is so sexually enticing, like me with this hair apparently is so sexually enticing that this creates chaos, and then men can't control themselves, and then we can't really blame men, when they harass, grope, or rape. Women from these communities tell us, like, this is modesty culture, and it might look different from our porn culture where we have naked butts in our face all the time. And I wouldn't equate these, because I don't believe women are generally murdered for wearing bikinis, but women can be killed for not veiling. So this is a life and death matter. Like, this distinction between whore and decent woman. Well, first of all, veiled women do absolutely still get harassed, right? And then they're told they're not wearing it right. So there's no way to actually escape. But this effect on women who are not veiled is something that I have experienced as well personally, and that's why this is about all women. So it's not about just the women in the community, but when we either want to travel to a Muslim majority country, or we obviously there are Muslim communities in Europe, there are significant numbers of members of that community who view women like myself, just Western women in general, as whores. And when I say whore, I mean the misogynistic view of women, and as sexually available and dirty and blah, is not a term that I would ever use for a woman. And I have experienced serious harassment and threats of rape on the street from men from these kind of communities. And I have friends who have experienced this and worse, like actual physical assault. And this is really not about saying, that Western men or white men don't have an ideology as well, where if you wear a short skirt, you're inviting something, etc. But I do think it is significant to point out, and one of the women who's part of this campaign, who is really outspoken on the subject, Yasmin Mohammed, I'm just going to quote her. So Yasmin Mohammed puts it like this: "Often I hear people wonder, what's the big deal if you have to wear a scarf on your head? The big deal is that women are not even allowed agency over their own bodies. Hijab is the tip of the iceberg. It is the physical representation of the subjugation and dehumanization and absolute gender apartheid that is common in many parts of the Muslim majority world. While women in the West have gained freedom to the extent they're now calling to free the nipple, women in many parts of the Islamic world just want to free their face and hair. So the way that I'm dressed right now is already too offensive to not every Muslim, but a significant number. Like, this is the problem we have. No, nobody wants to stigmatize migrant communities, religious minorities. We have to hold it in our minds. It can be both true at the same time that these are discriminated minorities, that they live in war-torn countries where the West carries a significant responsibility for the instability of these countries, and at the same time hold them accountable for when they're hateful to all women, any women, and girls, because this is where I don't think we're going to solve this through banning veiling entirely. I think it's more of a discouragement strategy rather than a ban, but putting it on children is where I would at least consider a ban, because the same way that putting a little girl on a stripper pole is sexualizing, putting a veil on a little girl is sexualizing, because you're saying that what I talked about, that chaos, that fitna, could be created by a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 6-year-old. Sometimes even toddler girls are veiled because they could be too enticing. Yeah, this modesty culture is rape culture. And in whatever shape or form it comes, whoever perpetrates it, whatever their own status and multiple discriminations, doesn't matter. And the other thing that I think is important that Yasmin only kind of touches on in her quote, she says that hijab is the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot more attached to religious veiling than just a piece of clothing. Now, best case scenario is just annoying, and actually from veiling you can get a vitamin D deficiency. I'm not joking, there is a health concern, but if a woman let's say society was completely free of misogyny, then someone could decide they want to wear this and they'll just take some vitamin D tablets, fine. But there is a lot more attached, as in, even when it doesn't cover your face, you're right, you constantly have this distinction to other women. I'm different from other women, I'm more religious than other women, or I'm cleaner than other women, or I'm just in some way perceived as different from different groups. It separates women into groups sort of inevitably. It's when it covers the face, I mean, just consider how restrictive that is to your participation in society when people can't even look you in the eye. So the other woman that I'd encourage you to follow is Mariam Namazi, and she says, the chador and burqa are like a mobile prison and body bag. Why should women's bodies, rights, and lives be restricted because religion, a husband, or the aggressive imam down the street demanded? A mobile prison and a body bag. It literally does not matter where you come from. If your face is invisible in society, then this is inherently dehumanizing, and it doesn't even matter if you chose it. Let's say most, even if, which I do not believe, most women would choose to hide their faces in public, how could we possibly have an equal society where that happens? But even more than that, let's say it's just the hijab, so you can still see the face. A lot of women from these communities tell us it is not just the face that they need to hide. There are so many rules that come with that. So you should hide your hair, but you should also not show too much of your arm. Like, this could be obscene. Obviously, not your chest, not your legs. It's not like you're going to have a mini skirt and a hijab, at least not in general. And there are other rules that come for many of these girls, right? No premarital sex, no dating boys, not even allowed to be friends with boys, because the assumption is like a male-female friendship would always turn sexual. There are rules about being forced to perform specific religious practices, prayers, and um, learning prayers by heart, including ones that are incredibly, again, misogynistic. And then there are rules about how women cannot participate when they're menstruating, how in many, not all, yeah, there's some liberal ones, but many mosques, men and women are incredibly segregated, and men enter through the front entrance and women through the back. So it's just this constant communication of, you live by our rules, and you are less than men, and you are separate from men, and all those things. And this extends to other parts of life. There are women and girls not allowed to participate in sports. I mean, famously, there is controversy around swimming. Some girls will just not learn to swim because their bodies shouldn't be exposed, even in a burkini, to boys and men. Some families don't even believe that their girls and boys should listen to music or be exposed to Western culture. And again, I really understand that there is a really complicated, violent, and oppressive history where Western countries have destabilized places, and that you might be averse to the culture of the soldiers who wreaked havoc. I do understand these things, but at the same time, the regimes that have sprung up as a result of this destabilizing are not your friend just because the US is also an imperial power. There are women and girls, especially, who have their access to education limited. What's the point of being too educated? Like, what you're supposed to do is bear children and marry. So there are obviously there's a fair amount of forced marriage in a number of Muslim communities. And famously, there's the male guardianship system, and this is not just in Saudi Arabia. So we know in Saudi Arabia that women and girls can't even leave the house, like go shopping or go to the doctor, or various things require a man to come with them to observe what they do. So nothing is dishonorable. But this can, again, happen to women and girls in Western societies. Like, I can only encourage everyone to read the book by Yasmin Mohammed, Unveiled, who talks about growing up in Canada and being subjected to these things while in Canada. So the girls next door get to do, parties, boys, makeup, dancing, whatever, and she is not allowed any of these things, which is violent and oppressive. to girls and to women. And also how Western societies then fail to protect women and girls from these things. This is a thing in Germany too, like the forced marriage aspect. When we had an increase of child marriages, married children coming, we failed to immediately separate them from the abuser. Again, I am fully aware that there are a lot of Christian communities who also permit child marriage and forced marriage and all these things. 100% aware. But this doesn't mean that Muslim communities who do these to the women and girls get off the hook. Yeah, it just creates a lack of solidarity if we only talk about the Christian girls and not the Muslim girls who endure this. And finally, there's FGM, female genital mutilation, that is practiced by a number of Muslim communities. So that's cutting off parts of the vulva, labia, the clitoris, so that a woman wouldn't experience pleasure during sex, so that she would be discouraged from premarital sex, and that just in general, like, she's kept down, she's not going to cheat, she's owned by the future husband, who will then open her up when he's ready. And there are specifically religious justifications sought by some Muslim communities, families, etc. For this. And women and girls who've endured this as a consequence of religious justifications deserve to speak about it and not have to hide the fact that it were religious justifications used. Well, clearly that's not compatible with feminism. Like, there's no debate there. There's only a question of how can we touch it delicately enough that we don't just encourage racism, but we also address the suffering of the woman in this religious minority group, or in our own country, obviously majority. When the actual government is part of it, how can we change our international diplomacy that we don't allow countries like Iran, for example, or Saudi Arabia to commit all kinds of atrocities, including murder on women and gay men, lesbians, etc. So I've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to discuss here, and maybe I'll have a guest on sometime, because like I said, I'm not an expert, but I think this issue is really important, and I'd encourage you to support this campaign. Even as a man, you should speak out and say, well, this is not what I stand for as a guy either. Yeah, so thank you for listening, and best wishes, and get through this pandemic well, all of you.